So when you have not even the pretext of crimes being broken, but the government specifically saying certain types of speech and certain types of political activism, we've deemed to be unacceptable. I mean, I don't know what else to call it except for political repression.
Almost every day also brings fresh stories of foreign students being rounded up for deportation. Last week, a Turkish postgrad in Massachusetts was surrounded on the pavement by plainclothes immigration officials wearing masks and bundled into an unmarked car. For a while, it seemed as if she'd been disappeared, as happens in dictatorships, until it was revealed she was in a detention facility in Louisiana, 1,500 miles from New England. Of course, most Americans would be glad to see the back of foreign students who abuse the privilege of studying in America by mounting disruptive, even violent pro-Hamas demonstrations. But in this student's case, all that's been revealed so far is one anti-Israeli article in her student newspaper, which you'd think would be covered by the First Amendment. Meanwhile, Columbia University's interim president has resigned after the university agreed to change several policies in response to political pressure from the White House. So is this Orwell's 1984 in the making, or a new age of McCarthyism? Or is it just the usual overreaction of the anti-Trumpers? John Ganz is the author of When the Clock Broke, Con Men, Conspiracists, and the Origins of Trumpism. He joins me now. So, John, is it a new McCarthyism, or are we talking George Orwell?
I think it's somewhere in between, to be honest with you. I think there is a potential. I mean, early days yet, but there's a potential for this to be a wave of political repression that is more severe than the McCarthy era. I do not think the United States is at the point of a totalitarian dictatorship. This is a country with a tradition of free speech, with a robust civil society. Now, those things are being sorely tested. We are perhaps heading in that direction, and if there is no friction or inertia, we could end up there. But I don't exactly foresee that outcome. However, this is in my lifetime, an unprecedented degree of political repression happening in the United States, directed by the federal government itself.
Give us some examples of that. I mentioned the case of the Turkish student, postgrad student. Well, we
Yeah.
don't know all the facts yet on that, and the administration's been quite slow getting them out. But there are other examples, aren't there?
Well, there's the case of Mahmoud Khalil at Columbia, and one could argue, oh well, these student protesters aren't very popular with the public at large, and Ivy League schools aren't very popular with the public at large. But Mr. Khalil is a green card holder, and the precedent of U.S. law is that they have almost precisely the same rights as U.S. citizens. So this revocation of his legal residency, or attempted revocation of his residency, is severe. And then the administration openly says, this is not for a crime. We are not charging him with a crime. They specifically said it was because of political activities. They used a law that was penned during the McCarthy era to attack political dissidents. So when you have not even the pretext of crimes being broken, but the government specifically saying certain types of speech and certain types of political activism, we've deemed to be unacceptable. I mean, I don't know what else to call it except for political repression.
If it is a political activist, though, who has been involved in violent demonstrations and in pro-Hamas, which is a designated terrorist group, pro-Hamas demonstrations, isn't the American government entitled to say you're abusing your privileges here that we've granted you? You're not an American citizen, and we want rid of you.
Laws created during the war on terror have given the government extremely high latitude, and many would argue too much latitude to label people as either material supporters or as members of foreign terrorist organizations. That is not what the government is doing in this case. They're using a particularly arcane rule from the 1950s that gives the Secretary of the State kind of sovereign powers to remove any person they think is interfering with the foreign policy of the United States. They may have some legal argument that that's being said that's they might be able to technically do it, but in the United States, the Supreme Court and lower courts have upheld the First Amendment rights of non-citizens. That's a part of our constitutional system. So they may have found some legal right, some legal tool to institute, this regime. But that does not mean it's in the best traditions of the United States or in line with the way our Constitution has been interpreted up to this point.
Is the issue at stake here one of due process, which is at the core of the Constitution, and indeed at the core of most democracies, which
Yeah.
is that these might be bad people, and it may be America should get rid of them, but due process isn't being followed to establish if they are or if they're not.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think that most Americans think that people should be thrown out of this country by a star chamber run by Marco Rubio and his aides. I think that, it's important that people get due process, as we've seen in a slightly different issue, this deportation to El Salvador. The people who are designated part of a foreign terrorist organization, this gang, it turns out that some of these people are making claims that they have nothing whatsoever to do with this gang, and they had no opportunity to receive due process, and they've been thrown into a dungeon, essentially, or a camp with appalling conditions without due process. And this is, unconstitutional and alarming, and goes against the traditions of our country.
It does seem to be the modus operandi, however, of a president who likes strong men and sees himself as a strong man. So, if that's the case, in our final minute or so, where do we go from here? Where does America go from here if this is the start of a trend?
Well, I am putting my faith right now, maybe foolhardily, with too much optimism in the federal judiciary. I'm putting my faith in the commitment of the American public to the First Amendment and to the Constitution and to due process rights, which I think many Americans, most Americans, I think the vast majority even, are still very attached to. And I don't think that violations on this order are going to prove in the long term to be very popular with the American public. Now, that could turn out to be naive, in which case we're living in a very different world. But
John, we'll come back and check
assumption.
with you and see if your faith has been merited. John Ganz there joining me. He wrote When the Clock Broke. It's out in paperback in the UK in June.